Barnaby Joyce has doubled down on the incredibly dear costs Australians will have to bear with the government's planned renewable energy transition, stressing nuclear power was a far more economically feasible alternative for the taxpayer in the long run. A motion backed by the Nationals MP to have his party dump the net zero emissions by 2050 target from their climate policies was defeated at the Nationals' Federal Conference on Saturday. Mr. Joyce said while he accepted the Democratic outcome, coalition members needed to consider the pitfalls of supporting the Albanese government's nationwide renewable energy push, especially for residents of regional Australia. With that target you have to be very aware of the costs, as Net Zero Australia has pointed out, $7 to $9 trillion, he told Sky News Australia's Chris Kenny on Monday. People have to be aware this is not cheap. This is not the cheapest form of power. This is incredibly dear and it's incredibly expensive. I suppose the best way to ground truth that is have a look at your power bill. The former Nationals leader said while the federal government was charging hard in moving to in-state renewable energy zones, REZs, across the country, the needs of communities on the ground were not being taken into account. People are so divided, they are so angry, and they just feel powerless, Mr. Joyce said. They feel that they are being dispossessed of their land, dispossessed of the environmental aspects of what they've looked at. They're being surrounded by an industrial landscape of wind towers higher than the top of the Sydney Harbour Bridge, so that a place such as Waka has got more structures over 260 metres than the Sydney CBD. If people want them in the cities, if you think it's a virtue, then apply to have them at the edge of your suburb, and of course you won't because they're disgusting. Mr. Joyce said nuclear energy was a significantly cheaper alternative, about 50% lower than wind power and 400% lesser than solar. We do support going to nuclear, and I'm very glad of that because nuclear would mean you don't have to build the transmissions lines back and forth over people's properties across the nation at the cost of hundreds of billions of dollars, he said. Renewables, they're not even renewable. There's nothing renewable about a wind factory or a solar factory, they end up in a landfill. Asked by Kenny if he personally thought the net zero by 2050 target should be dropped by the coalition, he responded, "I'm a member of the shadow cabinet, this is a position that the federal conference has endorsed, and my job is to be a barrister on their cause." Renewable energy has been a centerpiece policy of the incumbent Labor government, with the 2023-2024 federal budget announcing billions in investments into advancing the cause and establishing a national net zero authority tasked with promoting the orderly and positive economic transformation associated with achieving net zero emissions. The policy has maintained strong support from the opposition too, with leader Peter Dutton restating last week he remained committed to Net Zero Australia. Mr. Joyce's calls to abolish the 2050 target are directly at odds with National Party leader David Littleproud, who now faces the heat of increasing pro-nuclear sentiments within the party following a backdrop of the coalition being split by the climate change debate for a decade whilst in government. There is a pathway under a Dutton-Littleproud coalition-led government, the Nationals leader said at the Saturday conference. We're going to continue the pathway of accelerating the conversation around nuclear energy, the nuclear technology, that's zero emissions. MPs Keith Pitt and Matt Canavan are united with Mr. Joyce in rallying for abolishing net zero. Federal Climate Change and Energy Minister Chris Bowen has repeatedly echoed the Albanese government's strong rejection against nuclear energy options.